Hello and welcome to Lore Watch, a roundtable freeform discussion about lore and our favorite media. I'm your host, Joe Perez, one of several lore-focused folks from Blizzard Watch, and I've got my marvelous co-host with me today, Matt Rossi. How you doing today, Matt?
I'm good, I guess.
Quite the raspy voice to bring us in on this one. So today we are going to be answering questions from you, our wonderful listeners. If you have questions for this or any of our podcasts, please be sure to send those in to podcast@blizzardwatch.com. If you send those in, specify the show that it is for in the subject line, as well as any special pronunciation of your name. If you don't want to send us an email, you can hit us up on Discord. We have 2 channels set aside for you. One is the Q and Podcast Questions channel. Same rules apply. Give us any special pronunciations for your name and tell us what show it's for. And if you are a Patreon supporter, as a special way of saying thank you, we have the Patreon Q and Podcast Questions channel where we tend to look for our questions or themes first. Our first set of questions, because it's kind of 2 in here from Octomos, the boy king serves at the master's table. 3 lies he will offer you. If this is about Dagran, the boy king of Ironforge, who just demonstrated both serving and lying, both being traits not alien to him, what do you speculate that portends about the future and ours? So this is actually interesting because I think when most people have heard the boy king serves at the master's table, they've always assumed that it was Anduin, forgetting that maybe there is at least one other candidate, possibly more, and I'll turn to Matt for that, because when it comes to knowledge of the kingdoms of humans, Matt is second to none. But that is another option of potentially of a boy king, but he's not in charge right now. And he doesn't actually serve or do anything, at least to my knowledge, in any of the descriptors or stories. He's around and learning, and he's growing up, and he will eventually take over, but it's still the council of dwarves that are sort of in charge. So I don't necessarily know that it would be him. But Matt, are there any other possible folks that would maybe qualify for that being the boy king besides, well, Anduin, who's now definitely not a boy anymore, or Dagran?
I mean, are old gods limited to who's alive at the moment, or can they be talking about somebody who isn't alive yet?
Oh, or maybe that
Jaina could have a son, and then that son would be the boy king.
And we just came out of the Shadowlands, so it could be ones that have passed or died too, right?
Yeah, but I mean, there you start getting into pretty deep weeds. But I mean, for that matter, for all we know, I mean, we know that Kalia had a daughter, and so Kalia is not in the running here. She didn't leave any living offspring in that regard. However, theoretically, there's an undead member of Jaina's family who could be Lord Admiral. I mean, you could argue he would have been his father's choice to be a Lord Admiral.
Yeah, which is, I mean, the Lord Admiral is the equivalent of the kingship for the Kaltirians.
Yeah, it's literally the kingship. I mean, they don't call themselves that, but that's what it is. That is the role. For that matter, there's always Gilneas. At present, the heir to the throne is Greymane's daughter.
Tess.
But again, Tess could have a child. We don't. So that's the first thing. Right now, in terms of people who are sitting on thrones in Azeroth that we know of, I mean, not counting, I can't think of anybody other than Anduin and Dagran. And Dagran is king. He is heir presumptive of 2 kingdoms, not just Ironforge, but also the
Dark Iron.
Black Irons, Blackrock Depths. Both of those are his. The
and council, if he were to marry if he were to marry a Wildhammer, he'd be presumptuous to be king of all 3.
I mean, if he married the right Wildhammer, he just marries any random Wildhammer. No, but he
like the of the Thainship, the High Thane. Yeah,
someone in Kardos' family. Yes, absolutely. And the thing about that is, the council, the Council of 3 Hammers, is essentially a regency council. They don't call themselves a regency council, but that's what they're doing. Mm-hmm. They are serving as regents over Dagran. But when you serve as a regent, that doesn't unking the person you're serving as regent for. He's not king just because you're a regent. He's still the king. He's just not the king. He's not the king regnant. He is not reigning, but he is king. That is his job. The second In fact, the second that a reigning king dies, the heir presumptive becomes king, even if they're not coronated yet.
Mm-hmm.
And again, this is in real life, and I have no idea about a fantasy world, but right now it's fair to say Daeron is certainly a boy king. Just because if you look at it, the first time Anduin was met, when we first met Anduin in WoW, he was king of Stormwind.
Yep.
It wasn't, they didn't know that Varian was still alive, and Anduin didn't make any decisions. That's what Bolvar did, and of course Onyxia using Bolvar with magic. But so Anduin's been boy king before. You can have a king who isn't ruling, literally not reigning, but they're still king. In terms of all that, there's another possible kingdom if you want to like really kind of squint. Technically speaking, the Blood Elves have a kingdom, and the Lord of it is called Regent Lord.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a Regent Lord, that means you are holding the regency for someone. He hasn't appointed himself king, and that means that he is essentially leaving the throne to be claimed by someone who's a bloodline relative of Anasterian and Kael'thas. I don't know if there is anybody alive who is capable of filling that role. But if there is, that person would be king. Even if they're not crowned, even if they're not currently in Silvermoon, even if they don't even know that they're related to Anasterian and should be king. They're still considered the king. They're just the king who is not found. So that's one possibility, but that's an extremely slim one. Because as far as we know, Anasterian has no descendants alive at the moment. Kael'thas was, as far as we're aware, his only child. And Kael'thas, as far as we know, did not leave a child behind. Now, it's possible he did. He was in Outland for 10 years?
Yeah.
It's entirely possible that Kael'thas did, in fact, sire an offspring, and that offspring would be king. If it was a girl, it would be queen. Since it's boy king, feels like they're specifically talking about a male here. So in that case, there could be another one. The only other possible candidate, and I'm kind of pushing it here, is we know that the Arathi come back in the War Within, and we don't know who rules them.
That's also true.
Technically speaking, if there's a descendant of Anduin Lothar alive, that person would be a claimant to the throne of the Arathi, especially now that the Trollbanes don't seem to be a going concern. I mean, I think Thoris is elderly, and his son is dead and was raised as a Death Knight, correct?
I believe that is correct.
So that's theoretically, and also to be completely honest, the Trollbanes ruled because the Lothar line left. The Lothar line was descended directly from Arathor. They were actually the proper claimants to the throne. The only reason that the Trollbanes even had it was because they left to go to Stormwind. And then they didn't take over Stormwind's throne either, which is why did you do this? But that's the fact. We know that they left. We know that they served as the head of the Brotherhood of the Horse for generations. We know that they were there, but they didn't consider themselves rulers. They didn't claim any thrones. We also know, it seems pretty likely, although we know that Varian Rin's mother was Varia.
Mm-hmm.
We know that in the movie, Varia was the sister of Anduin Lothar.
Mm-hmm.
If this is the case in World of Warcraft, if it's the case in the mainline continuity, that would mean that Anduin Rin is the heir to the Arathor. He would be the Arathi claimant. He would be a double boy king, because he would also be their king. But we don't know for sure that that's the case in the game. We know it was the case in the movie. Don't know if that's the case in the game. If Anduin Lothar was Varian's uncle, then Varian would have been his heir, and then so would have Anduin Rin, unless Anduin Lothar had another child after his son died. Because keep in mind, his son died. So if he had another child, that child and then any children issuing from them would be his heirs, and thus heirs to the Arathi. So there's a little wiggle room, but not a ton. Quite frankly, I think that the two candidates you can really hold out are, I mean, as of this moment, they would be Anduin Rin and Daeron Thorson III.
Yeah.
As far as I know, nobody else really counts. And it's At this point, Anduin is not a boy, but the prophecy was issued like 10 years ago at this point.
Yeah, and that's the other thing too, right? Like it could have been something that passed, and I know that there was a speculation too at one point that the other person that it could have been referencing at the time would have been Wrathion, because Wrathion was essentially a prince to the throne as far as the mantle of Deathwing, or not necessarily the mantle, but the mantle of the Earth Warder, right? Like he was sort of a runner-up to that. Created and purified to try to resist the dark temptations of the old gods, and we also know that he has a large propensity for lying. Like straight up, will lie to get whatever he wants.
But I mean, I think it would be kind of hard to argue he serves at the master's table, because almost all of his actions seem to be against the old gods.
Correct.
But he could be being manipulated. But here's the thing. Here's a question: what counts as a boy to dragons?
Yeah.
Because I was going to point out something here. Abyssian is only a few thousand years old.
Yeah, I think Wrathion is what, like 30?
Yeah, Wrathion is a baby. He absolutely counts as boy, but he isn't the aspect. He doesn't.
He was like 5 or 6 in Battle for Azeroth.
Yeah,
so he's really young. He's
like maybe 15 at this point, because it's been 3 years since Shadowlands. It's been 5 years since the beginning of Shadowlands, which was 3 years after the beginning of Battle for Azeroth, which was like what from, you're saying Battle for Azeroth was 5 years after Mists of Pandaria?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I buy that, but let's assume for a moment that that's true. I don't have a timeline in front of me.
Even regardless, he's younger than 20.
Let's go with 20 just as the baseline here.
Sure.
20 for a dragon is probably infant.
Yeah, easily.
Even with all the memory stuff that they get, it's still like, oh, he's just a baby. You know what I mean? Like, I can imagine that Alexstrasza gets frustrated with him and then thinks, well, he's just a baby. He is just a baby. You remember your babies. Just keep it together. Whereas Abyssian is from the Sundering. So you'd think like the War of the Ancients and then High Mountain helped Abyssian be born. So you'd think that's at least 9,000 years. So does that count as a boy to a dragon? Like, is a dragon that is 9,000 years old considered a boy? Keep in mind that like Alexstrasza predates not just the Sundering. Like, she was born like just after the Black Empire fell.
Yeah.
Like she's old compared to Abyssian. Is that enough, or does Abyssian count as a boy king because he is the successor to Deathwing? And keep in mind, Deathwing only just lost the position via death. Up until Cataclysm, technically speaking, he was still the head of the Black Dragonflight.
Mm-hmm.
Even if he was like crazy and working for the old gods, he was still the head of the Black Dragonflight. So yeah, you could see a case still being made for Wrathion, because Wrathion could become Aspect. Just because currently Abyssian has the job doesn't mean Abyssian will keep it. If Abyssian dies, it's up in the air again. And there's another one for you. There's actually a third contender, a Sibelian.
Yep.
Sibelian is also younger. He's younger than Abyssian.
Yeah.
Sibelian was created. He was birthed by, Deathwing and
Sinestra.
Sinestra, yes, thank you. He was birthed by them at some point after the time where Deathwing started cracking open. Both he and Onyxia were born from that. They're both younger than Abyssian. Do they possibly count? I mean, both. In fact, Nefarian, Onyxia, and Sibelian, they're all younger than Abyssian. They just seem older because they're much, much older than Wrathion, who was the guy we were mostly operating through. It was either Sibelian or Wrathion, and Wrathion was the guy we'd known the longest. Although I guess we'd known Sibelian a little bit longer, but we only knew him for a brief moment in Burning Crusade, and then he just kind of went and hid for like a decade and a half. So yeah, there are a few other candidates, but I think it's probably at present most likely going to be one of those two, just because narratively speaking, it doesn't make a lot of sense at this point to pull in a dragon. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. And they could do it. I mean, they absolutely could. They've got multiple candidates here. But at present, there's only two actual kings, because it's very hard to convince me that Abyssian counts as a boy king. I mean, sure, he's fairly young for a dragon, but he is like 9,000 years old. I keep saying 9,000. 8 or 9,000. We don't know how long Hulm lived. We don't know how long it took for Abyssian to be I don't want to say created, but it's actually very similar process. Instead of a bunch of eggs being purified by a Titan artifact, it's a bunch of eggs being purified by another Titan artifact. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's an interesting point.
They basically came out of the same thing. Whereas the only one who didn't get purified was essentially Sibelian. And it's interesting that Abyssian was still vulnerable to the Whispers of the Old Gods, but Wrathion didn't seem to be. Is that just because the Old Gods were more creative with him? Or is he literally just didn't hear him? Because as part of the whole knife thing, there's that whole bit where Rathion's basically killing off all the black dragons because he knows they're corrupted. Even the one who served him as his confidant even kills that one because he's like, it's not your fault, but you can't be trusted. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting possibilities here.
Yeah, and thinking about it too, one of the other thing to consider is that it could all be meaningless, right? And we have to keep that in mind as well. Old gods and their servants they see every possibility. They don't necessarily have to lie, but that doesn't mean that they don't lie. Go ahead. Oh my
God. You just made me think of something.
Go ahead.
Prophecy is from the perspective of the old gods.
Yep.
A boy king could be freaking Odin to them.
Yep.
They're around pretty indefinitely. They don't have a timeline thing. They're they can jump around in time even. They've done stuff to, even to Norse Dormu, who was given control of the time waves by the Titans. They've trapped him in a time pocket at one point. That's what the whole War of the Ancients trilogy is about. Yeah, now that broadens the camp considerably. Any human king would seem like a boy king to them.
Well, yeah, and you have to also to consider what is a king, what is a kingdom, what is an empire to old gods. Did they style themselves as kings when they controlled portions of the Black Empire? What does that even mean? So there's so many variables that this prophecy is one of those things that is both very good and very frustrating as a result of how vague it is and how much it can be interpreted. Because, as Matt's pointed out, and as we're talking about here, there are so many things that would qualify potentially depending on what angle you're looking at it from. And so it's really, really hard to pinpoint what the most likely is. Although I think Anduin still remains sort of the most likely candidate, just
he's front runner,
followed by Dagran. But that doesn't mean that that's necessarily true for them. And the writers, the people who are crafting the story, have sort of an infinite pull as where they can go with this. Should they choose, they can completely end around it. They can completely do wildly different things and pull it in a different direction. It could also never come up again because, again, it could have just been a complete falsity. It could have been a potential or a possibility that, the servants of the old god saw that never came to fruition. It could have been somebody who was never born, or it could have been somebody who died during one of the great wars, but, in one reality, they didn't. It could be somebody who's not yet alive. You pointed that out, and I think that's something that you got to consider as well. So it's a really broad sort of prophecy, and until we start getting a little more, unless it pops back up, I don't think there's a safe way to really make any sort of speculation onto what it actually means for the future. Especially because, again, what constitutes a lie? Are they lying because they don't understand? Are they making decisions or telling people to do stuff based off of, incomplete information? Anduin often does this because he doesn't have a choice. That's part of the burden of leadership, right? And maybe that's something to talk about a little bit as well. As a king, as a leader of a people, maybe not necessarily a king, maybe as a war chief, maybe as the high chief of a Tauren, maybe as the head of the elected council, you're all in a sort of a position where you can only make decisions based off of information you have. Does that mean that if you tell somebody to do something that is ultimately wrong, that you lied about it? Or is it a generous interpretation that it's a lie because it wasn't correct? And you start getting into this gray area, and the old gods kind of love to thrive in that gray area because everything they say can be taken 10, 11, 12 different ways. So it's kind of unique and it's kind of special. So speculation aside, reality inside, like looking at it, it technically will mean nothing until it means something. And until it's a thread that they want to pull on, it's one of those things where it's sort of just kind of like it's Chekhov's prophecy. It's there and it exists and it can be infinite potential until they decide to pull the trigger on it. Until then, we're going to have no idea. There was a second part of this question from Octomos, which I want to get to real quick. So hopefully that answered your question a little bit for the first one. But the other one was, do you think that there is a link between the Nerubians and the Fal'dorei? And do you think that the harer are involved in that? So who are the Fal'dorei, Matt?
Spider elves.
Yeah, these are the driders, essentially, if you're familiar with D&D terms. So we've experienced them a couple times, primarily when we were going through like the Suramar stuff. There's even a toy where the Fal'dorei egg, you can turn yourself into it. People have been speculating or asking the question of whether they are related to the Nerubians or whether they're related to any of sort of the old gaudy type stuff. And I don't know, right?
Well, we know, this is what we do know about the Fal'dorei. We know that they were supposedly created by the chaotic magic of a failing Arcanador.
Mm-hmm.
The Arcanador, as you guys might or might not know, is a arcane item. Sorry, I'm having a little trouble breathing. It's an arcane item that was created by the ancient elves before the time that they had really, like the druids as they are today. They didn't have them yet. They had a different kind of group who used arcane magic to effectively, change and grow plants. Something we've seen that the blood elves, even when they were high elves, made use of a similar kind of magic. And it's, since we know that druids themselves also use arcane magic to some extent, because, was it Moonfire?
Moonfire.
Moonfire is arcane magic. And it's interesting that Moonfire is called down by a druid when it's from a loon, one assumes, Moonfire and all that. But we've seen in the past that a loon has some kind of relation with the Titans, even though she doesn't seem to be a Titan herself. That's as recently as the end of Dragonflight, we saw that Aonar and Elune had a relationship. What that relationship was isn't clear, although it certainly sounds like girlfriend to me. But yeah, either way, there's a lot of weird overlap between all these various things. In terms of why the Fal'dorei turned into spiders, that's never been explained. We don't know why the Arcanador turned them into spiders. Just do not have that information.
Yeah, and for further sort of discussion, the harer are war within race, or they're sort of, for lack of a better term, they're like deep elves. They have looks like furry patches of skin. They have underbites like a troll. They have elves pointed out like bat ears that look very similar to elves. And it looks like there is a bunch of customization in between. They're basically, if the Nightborn and Vulpera basically like commingled. So we don't know a whole lot about them yet. Most of what we know is, I believe, data mined, and that's really about the extent of it. I could be wrong. I believe.
I don't even think they've got like any kind of real spider correlation.
They don't.
To me, they seem like they're supposed to be halfway between trolls and elves.
Yeah, and I think that's really sort of the key. But I think part of it is the animalistic nature of them that people were sort of keen on, because the idea is, are these elves that experimented? Are these ones that splice genes? Are these ones that, tweaked with arcane or druidic magic to perfect themselves? Because they really are like this hybrid in between. They have, their feet are, almost Vulperan, or why can I think of the allied race of Worgen, almost Worgen in appearance. Their faces can take on a more bestial appearance. Their ears can take on more bestial frames, like giant bat ears. They can have quills instead of hair. Like, they're sort of like beast elves in a way, which is very, very intriguing.
To me, that feels more like something that trolls do all the time. Like, we don't know if the harer have a more elf-like or troll-like religious system. But
True.
both elves and trolls have roughly the equivalent of
And to be
hold
clear,
on.
elves started as trolls. So
Yeah, which we know. But both elves and trolls have effectively, like the trolls call them Loa, the elves call them ancients. It's still basically the same thing. Powerful natural spirits. And we've seen in the past both elves and trolls can draw upon those spirits in different ways. We've seen trolls who straight up embody a Loa and become animalistic.
mm-hmm.
So it's quite possible that could just be something that the Harer have because trolls and elves have it.
True,
And they focus more on it.
And it would also make sense because of where they're located, being deep underground.
Yeah.
You know, if your patron Loa is a bat and you take on more bat-like appearances, kind of makes a little bit of sense as far as I'm concerned. So
yeah, I mean, it is entirely possible that they have some kind of animal characteristic that is imposed on them in one way or another, but it might just be that it's part of their religious practice. This is all stuff we haven't seen yet. We don't know yet because it hasn't been. The story has not been filled in yet.
Yeah, I was gonna say again, they've just been data mined, and there's a lot of rigging, thinking that it's gonna be a allied race. I haven't heard anything else concrete about it besides that, and some of the character visualizations and skins and customizations that are in the game. But considering that NPCs are created using the same in-game engine that are made to make PCs or player characters, it's not terribly surprising. Could this be the allied race? Sure, maybe. But there's nothing story-wise that indicates that they have anything at all to do with the Fal'dorei and anything to do with the Nerubians or anything to do with any of that. In matter of fact,
there's one, like I'm looking at the pictures of them right now. There's one that has some kind of like spidery hair thing. It looks like the filaments on a spider, but I'm not sure if that's supposed to be spider or porcupine. Looking at it, it could be either.
To me, it looked like quills from like some form of like a quill boar or a porcupine or something like that.
Well, there's another one that kind of has like stuff coming down from the ears. It's got normal hair on top that kind of goes up into a point, but then it's got like tendrily stuff coming down off of its ears, which again could be spidery. But this is just we were speculating. We don't know.
Yeah, no,
but it definitely doesn't seem to be any connection to the Fal'dorei.
No, and not the Fal'dorei, and I definitely don't think it has anything to do with the Nerubians. And I don't think that there is a link between the Nerubians and the Fal'dorei.
If there is, we've not heard it.
If there is, we've not heard it. Also, the Fal'dorei seem to be more just another evolutionary step or evolutionary change inherent to the native race of Azeroth. And Matt and I have talked about this before. Dragons are really good at being elemental beings. Why? Because they're made of Azeroth. Trolls and orcs and more trolls and elves and stuff like that have an affinity for that. They already have a natural affinity for it. And we've already seen that when given proximity to a very powerful source of energy, they do take on those appearances. So, and elves continue to do this. It wasn't just trolls that do this and morphed. It wasn't just trolls that became elves because that was the end of the evolutionary line. We've seen elves shift. We've seen the difference between the high elves, the Nightborn. The Nightborn themselves are almost a completely different evolutionary track than the rest of the elves. Night elves are, essentially in the same realm of high elves, since they were like the highborn race of them. They were sort of like the upper echelon. But even then, those two sort of became two distinct little separate tracks where, night elves are very big and very strong, but also very in tune with sort of nature and take on a lot of those aspects. The high elves tend to be a little more lean, a little more lithe, a little more magic oriented as far as arcane order goes. We've seen that evolution with blood elves as well, where their entire physiology has shifted, right? And we've seen that too when they consume other energies, whether it's fel or anything else, that they continue to evolve and shift based off of that. Heck, the Fal'dorei even have corrupted Fal'dorei in the Temple of Night. When you go in there, you can see them. Their proximity to fel has continued to evolve their form, even though they've essentially gone from, an elf to a drider. So there's sort of that constant evolutionary factor that has nothing at all to do with the Nerubians.
Yeah, you didn't even mention the Void Elves, man.
Yeah, Void Elves are another one. Look at the physiological change of the Void Elves. Like, this is just what they do. This is what all the races of Azeroth just kind of do. Nerubians are in a weird spot. They're old god creations, essentially. They're still crafted, at least in theory, out of materials found on Azeroth, but we haven't seen them evolve like this. And Matt can correct me if I'm wrong and keep me honest. Even in fell environments, we haven't seen them essentially get warped by that energy. Not really, I don't think. And all the times we've seen them, they've either been undead or sort of just in this particular form, because I think they were crafted for a specific purpose.
No, absolutely not. You are wrong.
Okay, go for it.
Unfortunately, I had food in my mouth, so I'm swallowing as fast as I can. You're forgetting that originally there were the two things that came out of the old gods, the Naraki and the Akir.
Mm-hmm.
The Akir were essentially arthropod people. They were like an arthropod race, and they went forth into the world, and they were essentially like foot soldiers for the Naraki, guys like the Chethraxi and so forth. Those guys, they're the big, tall, tentacle-faced, mind-flary looking guys, and all the offshoots of them. We've seen there's big, tall, muscly ones, and we've seen there's big, tall, skinny ones. Those guys are the Naraki. The Akir branched off into multiple different groups that have been changed either by direct old god influence or something else. One of those groups are the Silithids, who the Silithids are an offshoot of another offshoot, because the Karaj, who are the descendants of the Akir, who were directly changed by Cthulhu, were the ones populating what we now call Ankaraji. So that's the first offshoot of the Akir. And they are obviously changed to be more aggressive and insect-like, which ultimately leads to the Silithid transformation. The Silithids are essentially Karaji that have just given up on any humanoid features, any kind of rationality. They're just engines of destruction. So that's the Silithid. That's all the way over. Then you've got the Karaji from whom they branch off of. But the Akir have other descendants. One of those descendant groups is the Nerubians. The Nerubians are direct descendants of the Akir. The other direct descendants of the Akir that are a completely different offshoot are the ones we meet in Mists of Pandaria. And I'm having a hard time remembering their name for some reason, which is annoying to me. But the ones that we basically, they have the queen who went nuts and was completely terrified of everything, and we had to go and basically stomp her and hand over rulership to a bunch of them that we were friends with, and then they basically showed up in Orgrimmar and were like, dude, we told you we worship the old gods. Why are you surprised by this? Those guys. They are also the Mantid. Yeah, the Mantid. The Mantid are also an offshoot of the Karaji. I mean, of the Akir. So you've got the Karaji, the Nerubians, and the Mantid, and then you've got the Silithid as an offshoot of the Karaji. We don't know if there's a specific old god that created the Nerubians. We know, in fact, that many of the Nerubians are terrified of the old gods and want nothing to do with them. There are various times when we see an old god or an old god-like force that interferes with and attacks Nerubians, to the point where Anubarak is afraid of it. When Anubarak, who is a gigantic Nerubian, he's a Crypt Lord, he's like Nerubian royalty, when he hears that there is a Forgotten One in the depths, he does not want to go anywhere near it. And this is after he has been transformed into an undead servant by the then Lich King Ner'zhul. He's like, we shouldn't go near that thing. And Arthas goes in and kills it, and he's like, well, I guess you can kill it. That'll work too. So that's a Naraki who is some kind of presence that was so terrifying that the former king of Azjol Nerub did not want to go near it. As for the Mantid are obviously completely thrilled with the old gods. At no point do they turn on them. They're not just old god worshippers, they're specifically Yashraj worshippers. But one thing we haven't seen, and thus Joe's not wrong about this, we haven't seen them exposed to Fel. We've never seen any of the Akir descended servants of the old gods exposed to anything really other than the old gods and the void forces that they have. We're going to see some of that in the War Within, because some of the Nerubians that we run into are working either with or alongside of Xal'atath, and there's some empowering going on. We know that much because they've mentioned it. But in terms of exactly how that works and how it compares to other things that have happened to these various insect beings, we don't have any real example of, for example, we've never seen what happens if a Nerubian decides that he wants to be a paladin and starts worshiping the light. We've never seen what the Fel does to them. We've never even seen what pure arcane magic does to them. We have never seen what happens if you dunk one into the Sunwell or the well of eternity. We've never seen any of that stuff affect them. So it's hard to say. We don't know.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe to clarify one other point is like their evolutions seem purposeful, right? Like you even mentioned, like they get more aggressive, and it seems like their evolutions are more based off of what you would expect. Maybe
I would argue that's the case for Cthulhu and the Akir that he turned into the Karaji and the Silvid, and whatever's going for the Mantid. That seems the case. The Nerubian evolution almost seems to be against the will of the old gods, to the point where the old gods and their servants are literally fighting to reconquer them. And that's interesting because we don't know why. We don't know if there's going to be anything in the War Within where it turns out, oh yeah, that big light thing in that cave that the Arathi are climbing all over and treating, maybe it exposed itself to the Nerubians and they changed into spider people. And that's also interesting because every other Akir descendant is insectoid.
Mm-hmm.
Spiders aren't insects. Nope. Spiders are arthropods, yes, but they're not insects. They're arachnids, and they're spider killers. I mean, they're insect killers. Spiders hunt insects. They also hunt spiders. They also hunt mice if they're big enough to do that. You know, they're not picky, but many of them are specialized in killing insects. So did something try to do an old gods on the old gods and corrupt their servants to attack the old god servants? We currently don't know, but that's one possibility. There's a lot of possibilities because this is a new expansion and we have no idea what's going to happen in.
Yeah, and it's going to be kind of a good place for us to start learning about this type of stuff, and it's a good opportunity to fill in some of those gaps. And honestly, I'm here for it. But I think answers most of it, so let's move on with the next one. With Brann Bronzebeard playing a prominent role in the next expansion, could we have a lore-related backstory of him? Magni is also making another appearance. How do you think he fits into the big picture? Moira is also coming along for the family reunion along with her son. What kind of role do you expect from him? And this is from Satire, a Void Elf survival hunter on Erethdor. I'm not going to lie, I 100% chose your question because you are a survival hunter, and I feel that you need more attention because survival hunters are rare. Yeah, where to start with that?
I mean, you know, in terms of backgrounds for these people, I mean, Brann and Magni are the brothers of Muradin, and they're all
he's the youngest brother, family. Right?
Yeah, Brann is the youngest. I believe Magni was the middle, and Muradin was the oldest.
Yeah, Muradin was the oldest, and in line to be. No, he was not. No, wait a minute.
He didn't want to be king. No,
he didn't want to be king. Yeah.
He was like, nope, I hit things. I'm good at hitting things. I'm not good at ruling. So Magni was basically kind of shoved into the role.
Yeah.
And it's very clear based on what we know about Magni. It's very hard to talk about any Bronzebeard without talking about the others. But in terms of these three brothers, it's very clear that Magni didn't want the job either. But he didn't feel like he could turn it down because he knew Magni really didn't want it. And Muradin really didn't want it. And he knew that Brann wouldn't be good at it. Brann is not a king figure. It's not his nature. It's not his expertise. Is Brann intelligent? Oh, he's brilliant. Is he very good at figuring out secrets and discovering like lost stuff? Yes, absolutely. Why waste him as somebody who has to stay in Ironforge all the time and basically try to run herd on the dwarven people, which I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but in World of Warcraft, dwarves are contrary and Machiavellian. Even the Bronzebeards, who are like the nice dwarves in most people's eyes, they very ruthlessly politically suppressed the Anvilmar line and kept them from ruling. The Anvilmar were the true high kings, and they got rid of them. They basically pawned off a Senate seat on the actual heir to Motimus Anvilmar and said, yeah, you can have a Senate seat for perpetuity, and now go shut up. We're taking over. That's why the Dark Irons revolted, and that's why the Wildhammers left, because the Bronzebeards straight up stole the throne. This isn't even disputed. They don't dispute it. They basically say, look, it had to be us. Nobody else could do it. But it's still a fact that they basically shoved the Involmars out of the way. So dwarves are hard to rule. I mean, look at what happened. The Dark Irons went off and made deals with elementals and weird magics, and they attacked both, Grim Batal and Ironforge at the same time and almost won. And the Wildhammers just wanted to get the heck away from all this. They went away and built Grim Batal and were like, look, you do whatever you guys are doing. We're going to do our own thing over here. And what happened to that? That got destroyed. And then they had to go and make another place at Airy Peak that's even further away and even more isolated. So they've been trying really hard to just stay out of everything. And so for his entire life, Magni was basically having to tap dance on matchstick heads and trying not to light them on fire. That was his career. And he didn't think it was fair to make Brann do it. So he basically took the job. Brann was very happy to be running around doing the whole, let's find ancient ruins and forgotten bastions of antiquity. I'm never letting that go, Metzen. So I'm sorry, I just loved the phrase forgotten bastions of antiquity. It's just one of my favorites. But yeah, so that was what Brann did with his life. He was essentially, I don't know what to call him. Like, he's the quartermass of Azeroth. Do you think that's fair?
I don't know that I would say quartermass of Azeroth. He's
kind of like Doctor Who if Doctor Who didn't have a time machine.
Yeah, more or less. Like his except I don't know. He understands. He is the epitome of the Explorers League, right? He is the pure distillation of what the Explorers League is, what it stands for, and what one would expect. He seeks forbidden knowledge. He seeks forgotten knowledge in order to piece together a world that we never got to know. And I think that's one of the really interesting things about his character in general. Some people have referred to him as like spacey, or that he's, easily forgettable. And it's not really that. It's he's preoccupied with putting pieces together of something that we don't understand. The Watchers technically don't even understand. Or if they do, they're not going to tell us, and that we don't generally have record of. He wants to know how the world was before it was blown up. He wants to know what Azeroth was like before the old gods landed here. He wants to know what the Titan facilities were all meant to do, because he understands after his trip to the north that they're all connected. He understands after Battle for Azeroth, they're all connected. They were all meant to be part of something. And what that was may not be what we were told it was. It may not have been a system to purely heal Azeroth. And I find that fascinating as a character, because while the rest of us are dealing with world-ending threats, Brann just kind of pops up and, he'll help as long as it's where he needs to be. Do you think, like, going into Alderman or going into the Legacy of Tyr, that he wouldn't be one to 100% want to go dig through all of the library that Tyr had set aside? When you do the final boss encounter in the Legacy of Tyr, if you look over the edge, there's a vast library, and it is a library. There are books and discs and stuff strewn about everywhere. Do you think he wouldn't, ignore everything else that's going on once everything in the inside of that building is fine to go read through that book? He would, because it's information, that's knowledge, that's pieces of a puzzle that he's been trying to solve since he first started exploring. Brann is, I hate to call him a lore master, but he's pretty much as close as you can get to that when it comes to terms of Azeroth.
The only reason I don't agree with him being a lore master is because I think that the approach is different.
Yeah, fair.
I think it's less that he's a lore master and he's more like a lore finder. Like, lore masters are people who've studied a lot of stuff and have the information to disseminate to other people. He's the guy who goes out and gets that information.
Fair.
So, but he's certainly related to that kind of thing, and I could understand him having a connection to the lore masters, or lore keepers, or what do you want to call them. You could absolutely see him having a connection with them, but he's not trying to disseminate the information himself. Like, no, if you're there, if you're there, he will tell you what he's doing, but he's not stopping to like do a book tour or to explain to anybody what he's found. He just finds it, lets the Explorers League deal with it. Kind of lets Magni deal with it, or at least he did before Magni turned himself into a diamond. And he would always be It's Brann, and technically it's Bronn's fault that Magni turned into a diamond.
No,
Because Brann,
I mean, kind of.
kind of in that it was Brann who found the stone with the instructions on the right that Magni used that turned him into a diamond. And
yeah, but
Cindy
also wasn't it also part of that book that not just the stone itself, but part of the book that was below the throne of Ironforge in old Ironforge that Magni was reading from as well, that gave him the knowledge, or what, basically to tell Brann what to go look for?
Yeah, absolutely. But it still was still Brann who found it and sent it back. And that's not like, I'm not saying it's his fault in a let's blame him sense. It's not, he's not guilty of anything. He didn't tell Magni, turn yourself into a diamond to get the earth to talk to you. He just said, we looked at and found that book, and now I'm going to go up to that place and see what it's like. And when he got to Alduar, he was like, ooh, wow, okay, this is like so much. This is like super intact. It's not like Alderaan, which is half ruined, and the Watchers there are crazy. Here, it's completely intact, and the Watchers are crazy. So yeah, this is absolutely a step forward. He's not going around going, I hope they use this wrong. It's not, but he's not concerning himself with that. He's busy finding out more. And I think your point that he's usually the one that twigged to the fact that, what we know or have been told doesn't necessarily reflect the full scope of what there is. That it's fair to say that the Titan Keepers don't respect us enough to be honest with them.
If they know it all. Because
that's the other thing is we knew, for example, we know that Loken straight up monkeyed with the repository of knowledge.
And Odin sure as hell isn't going to tell us anything.
Nothing that contradicts what he wants to believe. He's absolutely not going to do that. Like, in his eyes, Helya is this monster, and it's like, dude, you murdered her. Of course she hates you. Of course she attacks you. You killed her. And then you enslaved her with powerful magic so that she had to do your bidding. And it wasn't until somebody broke that off of her that she was free to attack you. And she did, because you murdered her. I'm not saying that Helya is on our side or nothing. She absolutely isn't. But it's still kind of rich coming from Odin.
And to get to one of the I guess the core of the question is what roles will they have in the coming expansion? I think there are two very important roles that they were meant to do that we're going to see them fulfill, I think, a little bit more than maybe they have in the past. And I think it goes down to our descriptions of them. Brann is the finder. His job is to find the hidden information, to find the hidden data, the stories, the pieces of the puzzle that other people cannot find. That's his entire specialty, and he is very good at it. Magni is the mouthpiece or the interpretation, at least to an extent. As Azeroth has gotten more sapient, I guess more awake, that sort of relationship between the two of them has gotten stronger. Even he's had to change what he thought Azeroth was trying to tell him over the years, right? Like, we've seen some instances where, no, I think this means this, and then later on it's like, no, it's actually this. Like, she makes me feel like this is where I need to go with this, and this is what this means. I hate to say it like this, I can't really think of another way to really frame it, but if you play D&D, it's like the old description of familiars. You can't really talk to your familiar, but you can send them emotions, and that's kind of what Azeroth is doing to Magni. Magni is sort of Azeroth's familiar at this point.
Yeah, that's certainly that is actually not a terrible way to look at it, really.
But Magni's job is to interpret for us if what we're doing is good or bad as far as Azeroth is concerned, or as far as Azeroth thinks of it, right? So we're going to this place. What we do here could have massive ramifications. There's this giant sun-like organism or artifact or thing beneath the surface of Azeroth. We have no idea what that is yet. We know that it is extremely powerful. We know that it has essentially a ton of people that need that have felt that they need to protect it, as if it was the source of the light itself. This has been living in Azeroth this entire time, right? Like, we've had past episodes where we've talked about speculation about where that thing came from, if it was an eye of a Titan, or whatever it could have possibly been. We're going to find out. But it's been there for an exceptionally long period of time. Magni's going to be the one that tells us what it kind of is for, based off of what we discover while we're dealing with it, and what Brann finds from the old documentation that has probably been lost to antiquity. Because we know, I believe that the Earthen have sort of lost some pockets of their underground civilization, right? They've lost some pieces of the Titan facilities and things like that they're trying to get back to, or they're trying to get back online. And who's really good at breaking into those? Brann. Grab those pieces, bring it back. Magni interprets. Then we figure out what we're going to do. Magni tells us whether or not what we're doing is good or bad. That's where I see it.
As far as Moira and Daegrin and what their role is going to be, to a certain degree, they're the thing that anchors Magni in his family.
His dwarf manity.
Yeah, his dwarf manity. He's kind of managed to reconnect with Moira and make up for the way he raised her, which is a thing that we should also point out. He's incredibly sexist for a long time, and he raised his daughter very poorly, and she rebelled and ran off. That's why Daegrin exists, because he drove his daughter into the arms of the Dark Iron Emperor, who, despite being a pretty evil guy, did love her. Like, the two of them were in love. This is not a situation where Daegrin was just using her to get his hands on the throne of Ironforge. I'm sure that it occurred to him from time to time that their child would be the heir to Ironforge, but he objectively and through his own actions proved that she was more important to him than that. Like, he went from, and keep in mind too, the thing about Daegrin Thorasan II, who is the father of Daegrin III, is he was the child of the first Daegrin and Modgood.
Mm-hmm.
And so what did he grow up in? He grew up in the ruins that his father created by summoning Ragnaros to Azeroth, and spent his entire life as a slave of Ragnaros. So this is a guy who did not have a good moral guidance at any point in his life. The elemental Fire Lord wasn't evil. He simply was completely amoral. He didn't care about anything except himself. But, fire. Fire does not sit around making moral judgments. Fire burns things. Right? That's Ragnaros in a nutshell. And his father, Daegrin, was unwise enough to summon this, and his mother, Modgood, was actually playing with forces far more dangerous, because she had Xalatath, and that's why Daegrin is going to be in this expansion, because his grandma was somebody Xalatath used. She's got her hooks in that family. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I don't have anything else really to add to that. Hopefully that answers your question. We only got through 3 of them today, but I think that was... You got some good information out of us. We have
3
plenty.
Is not bad for us, man.
3 is above average for us. Let's be honest.
We usually do, we've done shows that were about half of one question. Not even we had one of these that had 2 questions in it, and we answered both of them. We've had questions where one question was asked and we answered half of it. So I feel I feel like this is us hitting pretty hard for us.
We're batting above average. I'll take it. But that's going to do it for us today, folks. Again, if you have questions for this or any of our podcasts, be sure to send those in. You can send them into podcast@blizzardwatch.com. Specify what show it's for in the subject line and any special pronunciations of your name. You can go ahead and send those in through Discord as well. We have the Q and Podcast Questions channel where the same rules apply. If you're a Patreon supporter, you can go ahead and put those in the Patreon Q and Podcast Questions channel, because Blizzard Watch is made possible due to the generous contributions at patreon.com/blizzardwatch. Your continued support means that this podcast site and community is able to thrive and grow. Blizzard Watch supporters enjoy exclusive benefits like early access to our podcast, a better chance of having your question answered on our podcast or the queue by that special channel, by the way, and an ads-free site experience. Friends, thank you very much for tuning in this week. We'll see you next time.